What's going on, YouTube? You got Bacon here with my first YouTube content on Pokemon Draft League. I'm your coach of the Villanova Victini here in the ABC Season 1. The ABC is the Ace Battle Competition, started by my buddy Mattendo Gaming, who graciously invited me to be a coach for the inaugural season and also to help him out a little bit with some of the co-managing duties on the league side of it. So a little bit about the league. The league is a UCL style draft format, meaning we draft from the standard Smogon tiers of OU, UU, RU, and NUPU are mixed into one tier on the back end, and we also select one Z crystal. Now, for the purposes of BL mons, like Azumarill, for example, being in UUBL, it gets moved up to the OU tier. So it does kind of inhibit some of the value of the BL mons, where they would basically end up in a tier higher than they might otherwise in a standard kind of 5-tier draft league. But it does create some interesting opportunity to identify value in Pokemon that are either low, placed below where we think they should be, or maybe above where we think they should be. Normally they go a little bit higher in drafts, but because of just the way the tiers shook out, there might not be as valuable. So basically my overall draft plan here was to identify Pokemon that I thought in the lower tiers could provide some value kind of outside of what Smogon would normally place them at. Obviously in draft format you get to mix it up a little bit more, and Pokemon with higher levels of versatility basically inherently have more value than they would otherwise, where they start to get 4-move slot syndrome or shoved into certain roles on an OU team, for example. They can really shine in draft format when you have something that can give you kind of a plethora of roles and mix it into the rest of your team. So that was kind of my strategy going in, was to look at Pokemon that I thought kind of would overperform their draft slot, and just building a team out of that. And also at the same time trying to build with some stuff that I haven't gotten to use before. I'm fairly new to the draft league scene. I've only played about, I think, 3 seasons of draft league to this point, but I really enjoy it, and I really enjoy the team building end of it. So without further ado, let's just get into the draft. I started out with the wheel pick, so the 12th and 13th picks in the draft were both mine, which meant whatever was there when the board came up was a pairing that I could put right together. And right off the bat, top of my draft board, before I even started this, was Scizor. Now, Scizor ordinarily I wouldn't say is a first round pick, but in this kind of format, where you can get 3 Pokemon guaranteed from each tier, I think Scizor really returns a lot of that value in UU. So obviously the UU King, S tier in UU for a reason, but in Draft League, really nice because you can help to compensate for that fire weakness. Things that might magnet trap you, you can run Shed Shell and protect yourself. But overall, just a lot of utility from this Pokemon. It can be a setup sweeper with Swords Dance. You can run offensive, bulky sets, can run defog, it gets U-turn. Bullet Punch is obviously great stab priority for things like Ninetales, other fairy types in the league. Being able to threaten them out with a Bullet Punch and then hit them with a U-turn so you can get that momentum going. Just a really solid piece to build around, I think, from Scizor. And you'll notice I've got my nickname up there, Dedicated Sackmon. Shout out to my buddy Finn, who in the Villanova Pokemon League used Mega Scizor basically to eat fire type attacks. Uh, but he said every week that it did its job if he forced his opponent to bring some fire coverage. I believe it went 1-7 in 9 games. So hopefully we can do a little bit better with a regular Scizor on this end. I do like the versatility of being to run an item versus Mega Scizor, excuse me. So I think it does provide a really solid building core for my team. Obviously, with that only one big weakness to fire and several resistances across the board, including that poison immunity, I just think it's a really good start. A Pokemon that provides hazard utility with Defog. Just a really solid piece to build around here. And I'm excited to use it because it's something that I'm normally a little bit hesitant to draft because it's tier 1 in most 5-tier standard leagues, which is really costly. But in UU, I think it can provide some really strong value. And going along with that, kind of building up the U-turn core and things that I think can provide a little more value to my team, we're dipping into UU once again and snagging our buddy Infernape here. Now, my alternate team name is the Ivoryton Infernapes for my hometown, and because I love Infernape, and in Draft League, it's got so much versatility. You can run Scarf, you can run Band, you can run Specs. It's pretty much the best user of all 3 combined choice items. Not that it's the single best user of a choice band, for example, but there's not a lot of Pokemon that could run any of those 3 choice items in any given week and be effective with them. It also has physical setup in Swords Dance and Bulk Up. It also gets Nasty Plot for the special side of things. It gets priority on Vacuum Wave and Mach Punch, so physical or special. So it's really got a lot of versatility, great coverage. Obviously, it's a little bit hindered by the fact that I can only draft one Z crystal, so I can't nuke things with some of that coverage. But for the most part, I think I'll get away with using choice items, life orb, expert belt. Those kinds of things work really well with Infernape. So right off the bat, I've got two mons that form a really nice U-turn core. Infernape actually also gets stealth rock, so I've now got a stealth rocker and a defogger. Obviously, I don't want to be running stealth rocks on Infernape every week, so I'll need to grab some other hazard support as I go along here. But I think just from a two-mon perspective, getting priority, getting hazard removal, great U-turn core. I really like the start of this offensive core here. We've already got two nice ice resists. Infernape, while it's not obviously bulky, does provide a fire resist for Scizor, so if I think something's going to try, like a grass type, for example, is going to try to hit Scizor with an HP fire, I can get Infernape in on that HP fire, potentially set up, U-turn out for momentum, or just throw off a really big hit with Flare Blitz, Fire Blast, whatever. So I'm really excited for this two-mon core here, and just to try and build around them. This was actually the plan going into the draft, was to snag these two on the wheel pick there, and we got it perfectly right off the bat. So I was really happy to see that they were both still around when my picks came around. Now, obviously, picking on the wheel, I've got quite a bit before it gets back to me, but I started to think about some of the things that would also pair well with this. Since I've already started off a really nice U-turn core, let's make that VOLTTURN and add in Rotom Wash. We've got Rotom, because my buddy Dave cannot pronounce the word Rotom for whatever reason. He really thinks it should be Rotom. It's definitely Rotom. But we've got Rotom Wash here, offering me yet another fire resist to cover my Scizor. Also a water resist, which I actually don't have listed there, but a water resist to protect my Infernape, and a ground resist, ground immunity, excuse me, to protect that Infernape. So really, really liking the utility of Rotom Wash here, completing that VOLTTURN core, giving me another defogger. So right off the bat, I've got two defoggers and only 3 picks in. So I was really just kind of talking to that versatility and setting up a team where I can have multiple Pokemon fulfill multiple roles. Rotom here can run nice bulky rolls, obviously that great natural bulk with 107 defenses, and also the 50 HP running Pain Split to kind of compensate for that, or Papa Berry, things like that, to cover your lower HP stat with those great bulk. Uh, and of course, a really nice special attack stat and speed tier, so it can actually run a very viable Choice Scarf or Choice Spec set. In addition to that, just a really nice mon, something I'm excited to use. I thought it fit really well with the first two pieces of my core here. So going forward, looking at kind of what I'm pairing with this whole setup, I've already got some ideas in mind here for what I want to do going forward, but I just couldn't help myself on this next pick, and I scooped up Shaman. Shaman named Grace after my beautiful fiance who puts up with me doing all this draft league stuff. But Shaman single-handedly pretty much carried me to a championship in the Villanova Pokemon League Season 2. Really excited to have it back on the team. Obviously, it's defensive typing synergizing very nicely with the VOLTTURN core that I've already put together, offering me another water resist for Infernape, and another ground resist for things like Mold Breaker Pokemon, or things like Zygarde, which could hit Rotom Wash anyways. Shaman providing a nice ground resist for those, and its weaknesses in itself are already covered fairly well by the rest of my team. Like I mentioned, I've already got a couple bug resists, a couple fire resists. Rotom Wash is an excellent flying and ice resist. Scizor is an ice resist. Infernape is an ice resist. Scizor has a poison immunity. So Shaman, I think, is really well protected on this team. And it, again, is another mon that's really versatile. It can run defensive sets, bulky with Synthesis or Leech Seed. It gets coverage moves in the form of Psychic, Earth Power. Obviously, Seed Flare hits like a truck on offensive Life Orb or Choice Scarf sets. And it even offers Healing Wish support, so that if I have a setup sweeper like Scizor and Infernape, or some of my later on picks that you'll see coming up here, I can kind of play more aggressively with them on the front end, setting them up early to try and break through my opponent's team. And then if I think they still have value, I can remove them from the equation, uh, bring in Shaman, Healing Wish that setup sweeper back up, and try to get a late game sweep at the end of it. So I really like the utility with Shaman here, adding some bulk to my team with Rotom, Scizor already being kind of bulky on their end. And it's really a nice fire, water, grass core right off the bat here with Shaman, Infernape, and Rotom Wash. So I'm really excited for the first 4 that I've been able to build out here. And like I mentioned, I've already got some ideas in my head about where this draft is going. Obviously, I've got some nice VOLTTURN core here, but it'd be nice to bring in a couple of big hitters, great setup sweepers that can kind of take advantage of those kind of opportunities that'll be presented to me by this nice VOLTTURN core here. So, speaking of that core, we've got our first big hitter in Mega Tyranitar, named Tyloranitar after my buddy Tyler, who loves this Pokemon. I haven't gotten the chance to use it before. Obviously, coming in at the OU tier is a pretty steep price, but for this utility on this team, I think it'll work really well. Obviously, that massive attack stat in 164. If I get this in on a Volt Switch or a U-turn, it's going to be able to hit something hard, potentially Pursuit Trap a Psychic type that came in to try and stop my Infernape. I just really like the way it pairs with this team. Obviously, the only thing that's resistant to the Sandstorm damage on my team right now is Scizor, but we can patch that up later. But one thing that's kind of overlooked from Tyranitar, outside of its massive array of coverage options and relatively respectable special attack stat, it actually gets some really nice special coverage that can catch somebody off guard on any given week. But the other thing that's kind of overlooked here, besides its whole setup potential and everything like that, is that it has massive bulk stats with a base 150 defense and base 120 special defense, which in sand is multiplied by 1.5 like it's wearing an assault vest. So you've got a really naturally bulky Pokemon here with great setup potential and a massive physical attack stat. I'm just really excited to use this Pokemon. Yet another Stealth Rocker on my team, so obviously I can't be running, like I said, Stealth Rocks on Infernape every week. Mega Tyranitar offers me a great Stealth Rocker, whether I'm running it bulky or kind of an offensive rocker type set. The Pursuit Trapping is great, like I mentioned already, for Infernape, trapping opposing Psychic types and Ghost types, so I can just fire off Fighting Stab with Infernape. Obviously, my team's a little bit fighting weak right now, so going forward, I'm going to try to remedy that. Obviously, the big 4x weakness here on Tyranitar being the main thing that I'm looking to cover. But a lot of his other weaknesses I already have pretty good answers for. Scizor is a good bug, fairy, uh, and steel resist. Obviously, Rotom Wash also a steel resist, water resist, ground immunity. So I've got pretty good coverage around my Tyranitar right now. I'm pretty happy with it. I like the fire resist that it offers me for Scizor and Shaman. Obviously, coming in on a lot of special hits really well and physical hits, as long as they're not 4x super effective. Always got to watch out for that fighting coverage for mons that get it, or potential HP fighting on something that otherwise wouldn't be able to break me. But I'm really excited to use this Pokemon. I think it's going to be really good on the team. And the Psychic immunity, I also haven't actually noted, is great for Infernape, because obviously he'll get pressured out by faster Psychic types like Mega Alakazam or Scarf Psychic types that outspeed him. So obviously, great start off here. This is pretty much the first 5 mons that I wanted, actually. I didn't know which order necessarily to draft them in, because like I mentioned, I'm not too familiar with this type of format. I don't know where people usually go if they start to bank on those OU picks really early, or if they start digging down into the lower tiers and scoop up some of my value mons. But I really needed Tyranitar on the early build of this team, and I think it was really the right Mega for me to select in this round here. So moving forward, we got Dragalge named SCB for my buddy John, who is absolutely toxic. Um, just kidding, John. I love you. Uh, please watch. So we got SCB here, the Dragalge, offering me some nice T-Spike support on this team. If I can get somebody caught in the U-turn Volt Switch Vortex, the T-Spikes will be really nice to pressure their team, especially against more offensive teams. You can just drop that one layer of T-Spike and get that 12% per turn. And if they're switching fairly often, they're going to keep racking up that poison damage. So I really like that on one side. But the kind of other thing that Dragalge offers is its adaptability boosted Dragon and Poison Stab, which is not only very difficult to switch into, unless you're a Steel type, but obviously Dragalge offers that great adaptability boosted attack, which can be devastating in the right hands. So in this case, we've got a great VOLTTURN core around it. I can potentially get it in on weaker grass types, for example, with Rotom Wash's Volt Switch. Really, really, really excited to use this Pokemon. I think it can provide some great special breaking capability on this team, as well as some great support roles with its great 123 special defense stat right off the bat. I think it's got a great bulk stat, great utility in Toxic Spikes, and of course can hit really hard if you slap on a Choice Specs or a Draco Plate or something like that going forward. A few numbers of resistances here also that are kind of noteworthy. That grass resist for Rotom Wash is really nice, since that's the only weakness that Rotom Wash has outside of Mold Breaker or Zygarde, like I mentioned earlier. But it also has some complementary weaknesses that are kind of already filled out by my team. I've got the Psychic immunity in Tyranitar. I've got the Psychic Resist in Scizor. Ice types, I've already mentioned, I've got a few Ice Resists in Rotom, Scizor, and Fernape, and Ground Resist in Shaman, and obviously that Dragon Resist in Scizor there. So I think it's really kind of coming together synergistically here, both offensively and defensively. I've got some really nice hitters, both physically offensively and specially offensively, and I've got some great natural bulk on my team and great mons that can kind of slot into a number of different roles here. As you can kind of see where I'm going with this team, we've got a lot of Pokemon that are very versatile and can fulfill any number of roles on a given week just based on my opponent's team composition. So I think this team is going to be really difficult to prep for going forward. Next up here, we got Gliscor, my last OU pick, going with the nickname Nightshade, just because you know I'm using Shiny Gliscor when I'm using Gliscor. Obviously, with the USUM updates, we've got Poison Heal Defog now, which is great. So this gives me another Defogger on my team, also gives me another reliable Stealth Rocker on this team. So again, just trying to not pigeonhole any of these mons into specific roles. We've got great versatility across the board here. Gliscor offers me, again, some great natural bulk with that 125 physical defense stat, plus the poison heal recovery on any given turn. It's a great stall breaker with taunt. It's a great stall mon with like sub-toxic sets. And it can also run setup sets in terms of rock polish or swords dance. Which people I think are generally not as prepared for as kind of a bulky roost type set, and it can really catch them off guard because it's actually got a pretty decent speed tier at base 95, where it can show some utility on that end. And if you're not careful, you can get swept by Swords Dance Gliscor. This is the noob killer in any format that you look at, whether it's running a subtoxic set or it's running a surprise Swords Dance set. I think this mon's going to put in a lot of work this season. I think I've got its ice 4 times ice weakness pretty well covered with some of my other picks here, especially on the special side with Tyranitar being able to switch in and threaten some of those ice types. Of course, Rotom Wash is an ice resist bar freeze dry. Scizor and Infernape are also ice resists. Not that I necessarily want to be switching Infernape to things all the time. But I think Gliscor really is rounding out that OU section really nicely, giving me a immunity to my Sandstorm damage from Tyranitar that can also take advantage of my Dragalge's Toxic Spikes by running a more stall roost type set, just to kind of rack up that poison damage on people. Obviously, it can use Toxic itself. And so I'm really excited to use this Pokemon as well. I've said that quite a few times at this point, but these are all Pokemon that I haven't gotten to use before in draft format for whatever reason, whether I thought they were over tiered or whether I just never had the team build to use them before. But I really like the way this team's starting to shape out. And now it's a kind of matter of filling out the rest of my team. I've added another fighting resist here to protect my Tyranitar. I'd like to add a few more as I go on here. Obviously, Dragalge being a fighting resist on the physical end isn't very reliable, so special end, I've got Dragalge. Physical end, I've got Gliscor. I do want something that can eat both, ideally coming up later. And I think I'm going to show that to you in a minute here. But really just liking the way this team's shaking out. Yet another U-turn Pokemon, so that makes 4 Mons that can use U-turn or Volt Switch at this point to gain me initiative, get me into my harder hitters like Mega Tyranitar and Fernape, get me into some defensively bulky pivots like Shaman. So I think the team is really coming together nicely at this point. At this point, also, I've never been in a league where we've drafted Z crystals, so I don't know when those start to go either. Right now, I'm eyeing Phytinium Z for my Infernape, and also Scizor can run things like Z Superpower to blow through steel types. And also, me having Phytinium Z would mean that nobody else would get to use it, which would mean nobody can just blast my Tyranitar with Z Focus Blast. They got to be a man and click that 70% accurate move, and also do a little bit less damage with it. So that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. But of course, I've got my second pick on the wheel here. Before then, kind of my last quote-unquote critical piece of the puzzle here, I've got Reuniclus. Reuniclus being named Winston for my buddy Jeff. His cat is adorable, and its name is Winston. And I know Jeff loves this Mon. I'm really excited to use it. Magic Guard, really nice synergy with Tyranitar's Sandstorm, and also a great status absorber for things like my Scizor, which don't want to eat a Scald or a Will-O-Wisp or anything like that. Shaman also, of course, offering me another status absorber there with Natural Cure. So we've got good Will-O-Wisp and Scald Eaters on the team so that we don't have to worry about that with our physically offensive Mons. And I don't have to worry about, for example, switching Rotom into every water type that comes my way, because I don't necessarily want Rotom eating Scald Burns all the time. because it's really going to wear down its longevity. So something like Reuniclus here, being immune to hazards damage if I'm running Magic Guard, having Regenerator so it can pivot in and out multiple times. Two great abilities right there, and obviously some insane natural bulk with the 110 HP stat. It runs great Assault Vest sets with Regenerator. Obviously, the standard Cancer Calm Mind type sets, Calm Mind, Iron Defense. If they don't have a dark type, they better watch out for Reuniclus. This thing hits hard. It does get Focus Blast, which would be, again, great with Phytanium Z if I drafted it. So, moving forward here, I was looking, like I mentioned, at Phytanium Z, but it got taken. Firium Z got taken. Poisonium Z got taken. And something else got taken. So basically, I was at the point where I said, well, my team doesn't really need Z crystals to be effective, so I'm just going to start rounding out my picks. So in that kind of vein, great speed tier coming in here with Swellow. Revali sucks for my buddy Don, because Revali does suck, no matter what Don says. And I'm very, very happy to have landed this Pokemon this late in the draft. Obviously, filling in my last RU slot, so I've only got the NU Pokemon and Z Crystal left to fill in. But I think Swellow complements the team really well. I didn't have an offensive flying type, really. Gliscor, of course, can run offensive sets, but generally you want to be running at Toxic Orb, so you have to run some kind of weird sets to get rid of that Toxic Orb, like fling Toxic Orb into Acrobatics to get some good flying stab out of Gliscor. Obviously, Swellow can run Hurricane specially offensively, or it can also run a Guts set physically offensively with Brave Bird and Facade. Obviously, Scrappy Boom Burst is the bane of RU. Everybody's seen yet another U-turner for this team, so that makes 5 U-turn or Volt Switch Pokemon to this point, and also offering me yet another Defogger. Not that I typically see running Defog on Swellow, but maybe if I'm running kind of a weird choice spec set where I don't need the additional coverage options or something like that, we could investigate using Defog on this thing. But obviously, its bulk stats are pretty non-existent. This Pokemon's really just going to be using for breaking things. Really nice thing to note, in case you didn't know, in Gen 7, Swellow got a special attack buff. I don't recall what the number was prior to the buff, but it's now at 75, which doesn't seem like much, but when you're throwing off base 140 normal moves that also hit ghost types, it becomes really difficult to switch into, especially because it gets coverage in Heat Wave to hit steel types. So you better have a really good rock on your team to switch into this Swellow. And also, if the rest of my team can actually take pretty nice advantage of rock types. I've got Rotom Wash, I've got Gliscor, I've got Scizzor's Bullet Punch, Infernape gets Fighting Stab, of course. Shaman is a great rock switch in. So I'm really happy with the way my first 9 picks here kind of shook out. And basically, if I just had these 9 Pokemon on my team, I think it's already really difficult to prep for because any of these Mons can be running various sets on any given week. Even a Mon like Swellow, which on Smogon tiering, you pretty much only see Choice Spec Swellow in the RU tier, can one day just come in with a gut set and blow through your special wall. So you got to be really careful prepping for this Mon in particular, and of course the rest of the team kind of as a whole here. So moving on, like I mentioned, I'm not too interested in any of the Z crystals that are left, so I'm just going to wait that out for the most part. But sitting on the board in the NU tier, I'm looking around. I need to finish off that Dragon Fairy Steel Core, and I found Comfey. I think Comfey is a really undervalued fairy type in this format. Obviously, I'm not going to come in and say Comfey is like the greatest fairy type of all time when there's stuff like Clefable running around, Primarina, all those high tier fairy types, all the Tapus. So obviously, Comfey subpar as far as the average fairy type goes in draft, but for the tier and the utility on the team, I think it's really nice. Yet another U-turn Pokemon, count that 6 right now, with great priority in the form of Draining Kiss and Giga Drain because of its ability Triage, which gives priority to healing moves, as well as Synthesis, for example. Not Leech Seed, though. I did find that out at some point. But Leech Seed, of course, it does have access to, which is again, nice support for my team, which is probably going to be doing a lot of switching on the whole. Speaking of switching, another hazard remover with Defog, just kind of keeping rocks off the field, keeping spikes off the field, toxic spikes, stuff that my team might not appreciate as much. It's really nice to have all these options for hazard removal, so I don't have to be sitting there every week going, oh, I got to run Defog on Gliscor, I got to run Defog on Rotom Wash. Now I've got options here to kind of spread that Defog throughout the team, and make sure I've got hazard removal week in, week out, and also great hazard setters already with Tyranitar, Gliscor, Infernape, the toxic spikes on Dragalge. So I really think the team's in a good spot here, and we're just kind of filling in our typings here as we go forward. Obviously, Comfey giving me a nice special especially bulky Mon with base 110 special defense. Obviously, the HP is a little bit low, but it makes up for that with the priority healing moves, especially in the form of Draining Kiss, which can really threaten offensive dragon and fighting types and allow it to actually set up some Calm Minds. And Calm Mind Comfey is no joke. If you don't have a good physically offensive response to that, it can pretty much just sit on you and spam Aromatherapy, it can spam Synthesis, it can spam Draining Kiss, and just run through your team. So something that when I saw it the first time in Gen 7, I was actually really excited to use, but never actually got the opportunity to draft. So I think it'll fit in pretty well in this team, and I'm glad it was still sticking around here in the 10th round. So again, on that wheel pick here, we're picking up yet another kind of synergy mon. We've got Frostlass, Banshee. Oh, I should mention also my Comfey was named Lilo, after, of course, Lilo and Stitch. Great movie. But going forward here, we got Frostlass named Banshee. We got my Ice Ghost type taken care of now, so really, I'm not missing any types anymore. This is actually the last kind of combo that I needed was Ghost and Ice. It also offers a nice spike setter for my team, which I didn't have previously. And with all my momentum mons, I think it's going to be really nice to take advantage of some of that hazard support. So I really like grabbing Frostlass here. Obviously, its offensive stats aren't the best with base 80s. And obviously, its bulk isn't very high with base 70. But that speed stat is really nice at base 110. It can run great Focus Sash lead sets with Spikes, Destiny Bond, Will-O-Wisp, Taunt, Ice Beam, Ice Shard, Shadow Ball. It gets great coverage. Well, I shouldn't say great coverage, but it's kind of great for my team in terms of where it fits into typing-wise offensively, and giving me kind of a nice kind of dedicated lead type mon should I want to go that route. Decent choice Scarfer because of its speed tier for certain lighter offensive mons, things like Jolteon. Well, Jolteon not specifically, but things that have the bulk of a Jolteon, but the speed of one as well. It's really nice to have that speed tier up there. I can run a choice scarf set, outspeed them, and it doesn't matter as much that my attacking stats are so low, because I can kind of out prioritize those more fragile mons. It does get Ice Shard, and I believe it gets Shadow Sneak as well, so it does get a couple forms of priority there, if I'm not mistaken. So really, I think just a nice fit on the team. I've already got some nice priority mons now with Frostlass, Comfey, Infernape, Scizor. I think that's a really nice offensive team, but trending more towards like a VOLTTURN bulky offense, which is basically what I was going for when I knew that I was going to take Scizor and Infernape right out of the gate there. I already had a lot of these mons in my mind, specifically like Rotom and Tyranitar. Going forward, I basically tried to draft things in the order in which I thought they would go, so that I didn't end up getting sniped on anything, but also ended up getting all the mons that I really want in the lower tiers specifically, things like Shaman, things like Infernape, Scizor. So I'm really happy with how the team's shaping up at this point. And like I mentioned, I don't have any types left that I need to go out and grab. So we're ending off the draft here with this wheel pick, and then we have the very last pick in the draft. So obviously there's 13 rounds because we got to draft 12 mons and a Z Crystal. So I get a little bit screwed being the last pick in the draft, but I really don't think it impacted this team to much extent, if at all, going forward. Yeah, I missed out on some of the round-to-round trends, but every time it came around, I was able to know that I was able to draft my two mons right together, and I was really happy actually drafting on the wheel in this draft. So I wouldn't mind doing it again in the future. But like I mentioned, all the types taken care of, so I really don't care about that last NUPU pick right now. I know in my mind what I want. I'm pretty sure it's not going to get sniped. So I figure, why not just draft my Z Crystal right now before it's the last pick in the draft, and I'm basically left with whatever's there. So I mentioned earlier I was looking at a couple of things early in the draft, Titanium, Firium, Z in particular for my Infernape, but a lot of my mons, as you can see, don't really need Z crystals to be effective. A lot of them tend to run other types of items in the first place, but I do think Ghostium Z here pairs fairly nicely considering what was left. Obviously Frostlass being the most potent abuser of it because of its stab with ghost type attacks, but it also does give Ghostium versions of like Shadow Claw, for example, to Infernape to help it break through psychic types. Ghostium Z, Shadow Ball, and Reuniclus can also help it break through bulkier psychic types that might want to try to switch in on it and taunt it or set up on it or something like that. So while, like I mentioned, it's tough with the team restriction of building with one Z crystal, I think for what was left, I was able to get what I needed. And for the most part, I probably won't be running too many Z crystals this season. But if the opportunity presents itself, maybe in the future running some kind of heat Ghost Z moves, because everything except Omni boosts are allowed in the league. So any Ghost type move, I can run a Z crystal on it, so long as it's not omni boosting. I'm not actually aware of any that are for the ghost type. Um, but I'm excited to use it. I think it's, like I said, going to be more marginal on the team. It's mostly going to be reliant on the item that they're holding rather than a Z crystal. But I think for what was available, it was kind of the best choice. And rounding out the draft here, we've got Monty the Sandslash. Um, my team actually, if you hadn't noticed, didn't have a rock resist to this point, which is a big scary, because rock is a pretty potent offensive type in the league format. Obviously, I've got things that can switch in on rock types and threaten them out, and are bulky enough to take some hits, like Gliscor, like Shaman, like Scizor, like Rotom Wash. They're all great rock responses when they're in, but they're not necessarily a switch into rock types. Not that Sandslash is the god of all ground types here, but picking out of the NU tier, a really nice defensive stat in 110. It does give me access to Rapid Spin, which I didn't have previously, so I do want to run a Hazard Stack mode on this team. I don't have to use Defog as the hazard removal option on my end. I could run Rapid Spin with Sandslash, so I'm not removing my own hazards and kind of undoing a lot of my progress in the game. And in terms of a rock resist, I couldn't really find one that I thought paired better with the team because it does have access to Sand Veil, Sand Rush, which pair nicely with my Mega Tyranitar. I can run an offensive Sandslash. Obviously, its base attack stat's only 100, but with a decent speed tier and doubling that speed in the sand, you can get away with running Adamant in a lot of cases. And damage boosting items like Life Orb, Choice Band can run SD to set up. So I think it's, for the value again in the NU tier, I think it's providing some decent backup to the bulk that my team already has and to the offensive presence that it has. So something that I probably won't bring very frequently, if I'm being honest with myself, but something that if my opponent's not prepared for it, can definitely put in work on any given week. So that kind of wraps it up here. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully you'll stick around for when I start to upload some of these battles. Um, yeah, that's about it from me. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.